What's that? You said you want this channel to go to 11? Good news for you. Today we are going to do just that with my friend Dustin Ragland. We're going to actually be talking about Ableton 11 today. This is a long one, so buckle up. But I've done my best to put in chapter markers and shortcuts to, certain parts of the video. Dustin's used Ableton since Live 2, and we get into that. The first half is kind of him talking about his story, how he got into Ableton, me talking a little bit about how I've been using Ableton and why I've become such an evangelist for it. Second part, we dive into Ableton. I've been meticulous about getting timestamps so that you can jump right to where you go because this video is rather long. So I'm trying to do you a solid and make it easier for you. For those of you that aren't as interested in the first part, more interested in the second part, the pragmatic stuff, where we start talking about hybrid reverbs and, oh my gosh, we start talking about, roll the crickets. Spend about half of the video talking about hybrid reverbs, which is really exciting for me. Comping, we start talking about predictability, which is insane. Those are just some of the things that we cover. Dude living here in Oklahoma City that worked for Ableton has trained a lot of amazing artists on how to use Ableton. He's helped me quite a bit. He spent the better part of 10 years as a professor or a teacher at the Academy of Contemporary Music here in Oklahoma City, and during that actually he was touring, playing drums and doing all types of stuff for Charlie Hall. Dude's played in arenas. I mean, the guy's a big deal. I see him as a genius. Most around me, most here in this community think he's a genius. So I'm gonna stop there. I've gone on way too long already. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Here's Dustin Ragland. Legit, we are joined by the man, the myth, the legend, none other than Ableton's Dustin Ragland.
Oh man, hi everyone.
Thanks for being here today.
Well, I'm glad. It's such a glowing intro.
I mean, when I describe it to people, I describe you as a genius. So,
well, now I feel like that's. I mean, myths have they have like bad creatures in them too. So I could be Grendel, or you're, the heroes. So we're already going to the literary references, so it'll be good.
Well, I was going to mention that you are a bit of a literary. I wouldn't go as definitely not a snob, but like above any like normal civilian.
It's one of those things of like the tensions of. I remember it a while back because there was when hipsterism became self-aware, and this was like mid 2000s or something like that. People would be like, yeah, people walk around reading Dostoevsky, and I'm like, I was reading Dostoevsky in high school and like got made fun of for that. So it's like the thing of like, I don't know. It's always hard when that stuff becomes self-aware because then you start to feel self-conscious for the stuff that you're like, I just like this stuff. I don't care what people think about it. Literally, I do plenty of things that are like I care what people think, and it's not like I'm immune to it, but like those kind of nerdy things are always like, I just like this stuff. It's interesting and not. Oh, I should do this so people think I think one way or the other, which is hard. It's so hard because everybody's lives are so mediated through how they look now.
Right.
So, and mine included. So
I feel like everyone's like always looking to flex.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the self-awareness that I see is like flexing on them.
Yeah, that's the thing that's hard. Yeah.
Astute and learned.
Totally.
But speaking of learned.
Yeah. Let's learn.
Let's learn something today, shall we? So you work at Ableton.
Yes.
So this is great because I actually don't know exactly what you do at Ableton.
No, totally, yeah.
Could you kind of expound on what it is that you do?
Yeah. So I'm a brand manager. I'm part of the U.S. Ableton team and the Americas Ableton team, actually. And so it's a role where I, through the Southeast U.S., get to be the first point of contact for our kind of main community members. So educators that are K through 12 and college educators, certified trainers, which are Ableton's network of trainers that have shown some proficiency in teaching, experience in teaching, but not only their ability to teach music and to be great musicians themselves, but to communicate that stuff well to other people, to help other people make music, specifically with Ableton Live and Push. But so the certified trainer community, educator community, and then different community and artist partners that we have throughout the Southeast. So kind of like where I'm at in Oklahoma City, all the way over to North Carolina, and then down through Florida, and then back all the way up through the Southeast is my kind of part of the Americas in the U.S., where I just get to be the point person for people. Typically, that looks like I'll spend a week, a month or so going out and traveling to visit different colleges, different educational centers. So it's not just traditional universities. It can be, online, content creators and online school creators, and hosting events with them. Just kind of being able to build their support and their network, and help to, I guess, back up what they're doing educationally, as well as in between all the travel and working with that kind of stuff, getting to host workshops, which is of course a lot of the big thing right now is being able to do remote workshops, helping to be a resource for user group organizers throughout the Southeast. So different independently of Ableton, there are user groups of people that just use Live that meet all throughout different cities. So cities big and small, and they're in like the place in the Southeast you'd expect, like Nashville and Miami and whatnot. But they're also in places like Oklahoma City here.
I'm curious, do you, like as an longtime Ableton user and certified trainer, obviously, do you get to offer feedback on the software that they're, or on on new features? Are you helping develop it all in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, it's an open place in the sense that everyone communicates really freely about the things that we're working on, and it is something to where, like, especially when community members, certified trainers working on a beta, even if it's not like a new version of Live, they'll have this idea or something like that, and that legitimately does get communicated to the people that work on that, to the developers that work on specific things within the software. And so it's that is cool to see that really does happen. So it's not just like, oh yeah, send us your suggestions in the little comment card, and it just stays in the box for forever. But it is something to where we really try to be responsive to what people in the community want, or are trying to get out of a piece of software, so that it is something that is alive and feels still like an instrument that can grow. And that's one of the cool things with music software in general, without going on too much of a tangent. When you come from an instrumental background, if you play an instrument like guitar or piano, or you sing with your voice, or drums or whatnot, you tend to have this relationship with the immediacy of the instrument without realizing how that instrument doesn't evolve too much. And software has always been trickier because it can evolve, and so the expectations around it are a little different. And when you have music creation software that tries to be an instrument too as well, or that is an instrument for people, it's then a little bit tricky to balance the reliability, not reliability, I say what the expectations of the instrument that have always been there, the things that you're used to always using in Live, and then the things that you want to add and bring in that are new and that are that you didn't expect maybe.
So if I could, you're describing Ableton as an instrument.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think it's a common thing that people often talk about with Live, even to the degree where it needs some unpacking now, because it might be taken for granted even, which it wasn't the case for a long time, where you kind of have a couple of different forms of DNA when it comes to the development of digital audio workstations. The fancy term for recording software in some degree, something that records sound that initially came out of the idea of, well, we have tape machines over here. We need something that's going to take advantage of the power computers, the portability, the low cost, and then honestly the fidelity of audio when it's translated into digital terms. How do we take advantage of that? But it always came from the idea of a tape machine. Like, time starts here, you start recording, and then time stops here. You can edit and cut and splice and do all these things, and of course do incredible things with different digital audio workstations that think of in terms of kind of the tape paradigm. But when Live was developed, it really was built to be this thing that was intended for live use. First of all, the name, is very intentional in that sense, but it's also meant to be something where you can take your music and the raw pieces of audio that you're working with, whether that's loops or one-shots or textures or samples, whatever, and not have to think in linear terms of time starts here, we push play, and then it stops whenever we push stop.
Yeah.
But instead, there's a little bit more unfolding underneath that, in addition to all the layers of working with MIDI and thinking of the software instruments as part of that bigger instrument picture.
Well, for me, like as an artist, I feel like it's unlocked me.
Yeah.
I'm a long time Logic user, as are you.
Yeah.
And I was locked into that timeline, and this is a great opportunity to correct myself. Session view is the one where I'm typically writing, and I'm like, oh, I got a part, I hit it, I loop it for however many bars, and then out comes the song 2, 3, 4 hours later. Yeah. It's been monumental in my growth as a musician and artist, which is why I've started using it exclusively.
Yeah.
So yeah, big ups to the Ableton team, you and everyone involved in that. I'm curious about what Ableton 11 has to offer.
Yeah, I mean it's without doing too much tell and not show. It's really there's a couple of the big highlight features would be comping, the addition of comping,
Which I'm very excited about.
Which speaking personally, just as a musician that's using this, and again as somebody that's been using Live as my quote unquote normal digital audio workstation for my entire kind of recording life since 2003, comping is a big addition in that it really fits into the DNA of what Ableton's doing, and all of the talk that we just did about being an instrument and the software being an instrument can get slowed down when you start thinking in your editing brain or whatever that is whenever you're working with a DAW. And in this sense, comping really fits so well into Ableton's goal to keep things simple and not have to dive for a lot of individual elements. And it really just feels like you can flow from, okay, I'm composing, I'm working with elements here, and then, okay, now I'm recording and tracking multiple layers. And as a drummer, specifically for my stuff, when I'm sending stuff off to work even remotely, so right now, even specific to COVID times, when I'm working remotely for someone else and they're like, hey, I'm gonna send you some files, play some drums to it, send us a few different ideas, I can go in and think actually in relatively tape terms inside of Live in arrangement view, not in session view sometimes for this. An arrangement view and just record.
Arrangement view is the timeline. You're more what people are typified as a typical DAW.
Yeah, where things start on the left and they end on the right, and you can arrange and edit different elements and go back and forth between those two things. But a lot of the time, if I'm working in arrangement view in that sense, I'll start and play maybe my weirdest drum idea first, and then I'll immediately just go back and start at the exact same place, start recording again. And I know now within Live 11 that I'm never going to record over anything that I did. It's just going to organize all of that for me into my take lanes, and then I can go through and either creatively mix and match that or treat it as kind of like a more quote-unquote traditional, I'm going to choose this take here and this performance here and this performance here, or just quickly be able to export a lot of different performances when you're working remotely where the person may not even know or give a clear idea of what they want. And you can go, here's a couple of options, and you can use which ones you need versus having a lot of back and forth and that turning into a long process. So comping is a big thing with that for Live 11. Another one it's very different. So maybe not an opposite end of the spectrum, but just a different part of the constellation of creative tools is the use of probability and the development of probability elements inside of MIDI clips. So, let's say you take a MIDI clip where you fill it up with a bunch of 16th notes and it's playing this particular pattern, melodic pattern. It's like an arpeggio. You can set per each one of those notes the likelihood that that note will sound every time this loop happens. So what it allows you to do is create a loop of things really quickly, but then every time that loop happens, it's unique. And it's one of the quickest ways I've found, and it really has changed the way I've started to write things. And again, that's not as like me, Ableton guy, talking about it. It really is, as a composer, it's changed the way that I'll approach writing loops, because a lot of the times we're worried about with loops the repetitiveness of it. And just having that layer of probability that you can put into each individual note and control how that works even within the phrase of the loop, and make it busier at the end of the loop or at the beginning or in the middle or whatnot. All that is really, really powerful and really fun to work with. So
I want to see that in real time.
Yeah, we'll have to see some of that
stuff.
Yeah, that's
we're going to dive in here in a second, but
yeah.
I'm curious, like as a film composer, which is like kind of my primary career, what I do, is there a place for a film composer composing a film for a film in Ableton?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And the reason I say yes is, one, you can work with tracks of video and live really straightforwardly. The comping features that we can do with audio, we can do with video as well inside of Live, and that's new with Live 11.
Yeah, I need to see that too.
Yeah, that's something that is really, it's a kind of an interesting, powerful tool that's there. And with video workflow, again, the whole point of it is for it not to be something that slows you down when you're in your creative process, but to just be able to flow from, I've got an idea, I need to get it down right now. And when we talk about it being an instrument, that's the instrument idea, is I can go and pick up, sit down at the piano right here or at the organ and go pick up a guitar and get an idea out, because maybe that's what I need to do in that second to capture it. Same thing with video and all of then the creative elements within the audio world that sit around that inside of Live. That's where it feels really compelling to me in doing any kind of film or video composition, is that there's just not a hard wall between, now I'm in video world and I'm doing video stuff, and now I'm in music world and I'm doing music stuff. But you can move back and forth between those hopefully really, really seamlessly.
I may want to come back and do an episode just on that feature.
That would be really fun.
Because I've yet to bring in video
Gotcha,
and start a workflow. I've written some pieces, but they weren't to picture lock or anything.
Totally,
I'm really curious about that.
Yeah.
One last thing before we go ahead and dive in. I'm curious, or for those that aren't very familiar with Ableton, it's actually a twofold question. Why Ableton?
Yeah.
And then explain to me Max.
Gotcha. Yeah, those are both great questions. I mean, the why with Ableton is always, again, a question of what are you trying to accomplish as a musician? What are you trying to do creatively? And I began with live. My background with live is that I met an M Audio rep back in 2003, summer of 2003. I was on tour with Charlie, and we were playing in San Diego.
Charlie Hall.
Yep, and I met a rep who was selling, at that point, M Audio was the one who distributed Live. It was Live 2.6, I think is what the point number was. It's Live 2.4, 0.6, and got a copy of Live, and it was the only thing I had that recorded audio on my MacBook that I just got, and I just got an Apple computer, and I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. That was back when Apple made computers for creative people, and it was like, oh, this is great. And then I got Reason like 2, or I think it was Reason 2 or Reason 1.5 or something like that.
A while.
It's been a long time. It feels like that's just funny to think how old that is. But the Reason I understood because it looked like an instrument, and then Live I understood because it recorded audio for me. But it was always a really normal one. You were talking earlier about Logic, how it could feel like a brain shift to go from Logic to Live, or just to learn Live after you're used to Logic. Mm-hmm. I had the same brain shift, except in the opposite direction when I started learning Logic. And I started by creating simple projects in Logic and having asked myself the question of why would I want to add this to the repertoire. But the biggest kind of short pitch with Live is really that it allows you to get from nothing to something really, really quickly. And that's a huge thing when you're sitting at a computer, particularly if you have to work on a computer all day long and then you want to be creative. It gives you so much power to be able to work with a computer. But the way you work with that and having to set up a big session and then spend all this time just setting things up before you ever make sounds, Live really does a great job of, I've opened it, I'm going to start making something right now. And then you get in the flow, and then 2 hours later, you realize you've written something really significant for yourself.
That's been the marker of 2020 for me, was learning Ableton back in February, March.
Yeah.
And then, moving into a quarantine and being like, well, now I have all this time to learn this new instrument.
Yeah.
And writing literally, I think, over 50 songs this year.
Amazing.
Which for me is like a prolific output.
Yeah.
Myself.
That's prolific.
Some for just myself, some with me and my creative partner. But either way, man, it's been a massive shift in a great direction, and I'm evangelizing Ableton to all.
Yeah, totally.
And then I'm curious about Max.
Yeah. So and maybe
Max,
to go along
I
with
can't
that.
really. I haven't been able to wrap my head around Max yet.
I mean, the shortest thing with Max is that it's an environment that allows you to take advantage of all of these creative. There can be audio effects, there can be MIDI effects, there can be software instruments, there can be video effects or video composition tools. And they're software plugins, so they run inside of the separate program called Max that actually opens up with Live and is just seamlessly tied together in an environment called Max for Live specifically. And then Max is also a standalone program. But Max itself allows you not only to take advantage of a huge community of artists that create these tools, and they can be the most, kind of interesting ways of approaching composition and effects and sound art. And it really extends even outside of maybe writing songs and writing film scores and things like that into sound art, installations, and physical things. But maybe the biggest kind of a hook for Max is that it allows you to build your own versions of all this stuff. So you can spend time learning this visual coding environment and build your own plugins, which the first time, I think I spent a while not really understanding it back when it was the early Max for Live days, and then in the shift into Live 9 suite, I really spent some time to just learn Max over like a concentrated, couple of months to go, I at least just want to get a couple of fundamentals down. And once it clicked, it really opened up, it rewired my brain in the way that a lot of people describe like modular synthesis, rewiring your brain, which is also something that does that. Because now the elements of sound are so, when they're put into modules, it feels like you can then reorganize all that into your own very creative, very individual sort of approach. And that's not, putting too much pressure on Max. That really is one of the most interesting things about Max for Live is that it's unique. There's no other DAW that incorporates that much openness into something that is a really, kind of a established environment for creating music. And so the openness of Max also just becomes super exciting. And that's, you can develop your own tools. Like there's, that one of the earliest things that I did with Max that finally clicked was like, okay, I want to take push, and there's a touch strip on push, and I want to be able to take that and like strum it like an omnichord, like the old omnichord instrument. And it's still a thing that I probably talk about too much, but I remember because it was just, man, this is a cool idea. I wonder if I could do this. And then taking the time to learn how to figure out the numbers and how this routing would work inside of Max. And then before long, I was like, okay, now this has changed this instrument that I have push into a different thing, which is really powerful, not only to have that opportunity, but also for the development of Live and Max to be open enough to allow you to go in and, oh yeah, you want to change this hardware instrument around? Cool, go for it.
Yeah.
So,
do you remember how long it took you to make that?
I mean, it was a couple of days of like really intensive tweaking on it, and then several weeks of like, oh, this is broken, I could do this better. And then where I posted it on maxforlive.com, which is a forum that hosts both like professionally made, commercially made, and then my like homemade Max devices for anybody that does that kind of stuff. Posted it on there, and then people would offer some ideas and feedback and be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna take that in and I can go in and change it. And that's one of the cool things, is that also can evolve over time. I just saw the other day, there's a great Max for Live artist and developer, and a really great live person, goes by the name of Patches. It's like P_Atches, I think on Twitter and Instagram, who's developing this really awesome strummer for push. And it's way cooler than whatever my deal. And it's just cool to see that kind of thing happen, because they took this deal and were like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna make this a million times better. They didn't take my thing, they just had this idea themselves and then made it in this really unique and creative way. And it's like, that's the cool thing about it, is that for all the talk of community as being something forced, the community that happens in that sense with Mac stuff is just that it's people going together and going, what if we tried this? And then helping one another to figure that out. It's all open source.
Yeah.
So if I went into this device and looked and was like, oh, I'm curious how they pulled this off, I could open it up, see all the routing, see all the elements and the objects they used, and go, oh, that's really cool. And then I'm learning from that as it happens. And so, and it's not learning in that person's sitting me down and going, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. But they're going, here's how I did it. You can see it. And then I have to take that and synthesize all that with what I know, and then learn new stuff from it.
That's certainly one of the most attractive things about Ableton to me, is the community that surrounds it.
Sure, totally.
There's not really like a Pro Tools community or even like a Logic community. I mean, sort of.
Sure.
But Ableton, people like love Ableton, and there's so many people that like have built careers centered around working in Ableton and showing you how to use Ableton. Yeah. I'm taking an Ableton course right now.
Yeah.
Just because you're not available to me 8 hours a day. But I'm excited to dive into Ableton 11 and some of what it has to offer. So let's move on to that.
Awesome.
So we're sitting here in front of Ableton 11, and you've got, you know what? You just take it away.
No. Yeah. So yeah, we've got Live 11 up, and one of the cool things that goes with comping, and the fact that, for myself as a drummer, I'm going to need to work with multiple mics and multiple tracks a lot as one thing, is the link track editing, which you can see from the little link kind of chain icon right there, that allows me just to make changes to all these tracks, even if I only change one of them. So to get to my comping, so in this track, it's a kind of like an indie rock song with acoustic instruments, primarily acoustic and electric instruments, and acoustic drums. So here's what the drum's going to sound like.
And you recorded that here in your studio?
I did this at Cardinal Song, which is Michael Japania's studio in Oklahoma City, Northwest Oklahoma City. That's a beautiful, beautiful space. And so I came in here, recorded a few tracks, and for each one of those ideas, I think we talked about it, it's cool as a drummer to be able to think, oh, I want to try one idea, and then maybe a different thing, a different thing, a different thing, and then be able to mix and match those together. So if I look at any one of my individual drum tracks, I see that I've got these different take lanes. So take one, which is my really descriptive name for that, and then busier, which is a busier version of it, more toms. So, it kind of name it however you want to. I sometimes get in trouble by naming my projects not too clever things. Like I'll be thinking about something, or I'll see like a picture and I'm like, oh, it's a dolphin. Yeah. This is the dolphin song, versus describing This is
What you actually
an up-tempo
did?
song in
Yeah.
A major, you know. So yeah, so you know, I can go through and quickly, let's say for this verse 2 section. Right now, it's using the more Tom's take, which is cool, but maybe I just want to try the busier take. So I'll select this portion of time over the audio for busy, and I'll just hit return. And now every single one of those tracks that's in that group that I talked about switches to the busier take, and I can listen to that. And let's say it's like, okay, cool, maybe I like that, but maybe I want to actually try the take one. That was my first idea that I went with. I could also use Ableton's draw mode, the pencil tool right here, just to click and drag.
Is that shortcut B?
Yep, shortcut B,
Cool.
yep. And so I can click and drag and do that over any portion of my takes, and it's just going to populate my take lanes like that. My content lane, which is my main take, or the combination of all the individual takes here. But
This seems like such an Ableton thing to do, and I wanted it so badly. So when it was announced, I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect timing.
yeah, it's really, I mean, it's helpful for, and it goes to anything that you're adding in as a layer. Like the bass line here, I've got fingers bass, which is, you know, going to be just me playing with fingers. And then I've got one that's all based around pick. And I can use these preview icons over here to audition just this take without changing anything in my main content lane. I can just go, oh, what does pick sound like? It's gonna have a little more picky stuff. What does fuzz sound like, you know? It's obviously more overdriven and fuzzy, and I can always go back to what I had before with just the fingers. So it's all that stuff with comping is really, really fun with Live 11 and allows, it's not just a like, I'm gonna use this as a utility to make the best performance, but really to creatively think, I have freedom to try some ideas out, and I know that I can quickly move between those ideas and see if they fit or not.
Yeah.
So.
And also, can we just talk about how beautiful that is? It's gorgeous.
That's one of the things that I think whenever my wife comes in and I'm working on something in live and she just looks at it, she's like, oh, I like those colors.
It's like you're making art.
And you know, I know that like we like initially like we, you know, if you're somebody that works at DAWs all the time, that gets lost in it. But it's honestly something that it matters. It matters that it's beautiful.
Oh, totally.
To look at. And a cool thing to mention, since you mentioned that as part of Live 11, there are a couple of features in our preferences. I know the preferences are always the really fun thing to go to, but there are some things for using what's called reduced automatic colors, which just helps folks that have different kinds of color blindness, like tritanopia, deuteranopia, protanopia, to have colors that don't look too close together so that you have better contrast if you have any sort of color vision issues. And
Okay, well that's legit.
which is nice, yeah, to be able to, for people working on music, there's a huge world of development that everyone in music production has to do with accessibility for folks, but it's one of the small and continuing steps that we're trying to work with.
Is dark mode new?
No, there are different themes that we have for live. So there are new themes with Live 11. So light, mid-dark, and dark, and mid-light. And then there's a couple of Live 10 themes that are there. So
I haven't. I want to change my theme.
yeah,
I'll do that when I get home.
I like dark themes, so
That's
it's
sexy.
kind of, yeah, it's just fun to work with. So
Yeah, that's beautiful.
but yeah, you can customize it. And there's some resources too to make custom themes that are really cool. There's a website called sonicbloom.net that Madeline Bloom runs, and she can help like make really cool custom like themes all the time. Yeah, it's really cool.
That's rad.
Yeah. So that's one kind of big thing Live 11 wise. Another thing that I think is really fun is I'll pull up this
Probabilities.
Yeah, so this is
Yeah, I'm real intrigued about this.
So yeah, there's you know, as we go through individual set loading things, you can decide whether or not to have us on camera being like, hey everybody, you know, we're going different sets. But so I mentioned with probabilities, the biggest thing that for me is so interesting is that it's changing the way that I'm writing. So for example, let's say I've got this pluck sound and I can just play it here on push. You just kind of hear notes, right? So if I go in and create a MIDI clip, again, working in live session view, which this is the place where, you know, as we were talking earlier about live not tying you down to a linear timeline, like starts and ends.
This is almost where I am exclusively.
Exactly. And so that's, depending on the project I'm in, I'll lean one way or the other a lot of times, but the sweet spot is when you're like going back and forth, right? So I'll make a new MIDI clip. I'll just double click to make a new MIDI clip right here. And taking advantage a little bit of the new keys and scales mode that's in Live 11, new keys and scale functionality in Live 11, I can pick the scale of, let's say, A Phrygian, right? So pick a cool A Phrygian scale. You may not know what A Phrygian even is, you know, as a musician.
Yeah, no,
that's the cool thing.
I definitely
do. Of course I know what it is, but yeah, it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I don't even know if this is like a major or minor leaning mode, but I know what the notes are, and I know that anything that I draw in here now is going to be in that key, which is really nice and powerful. So if you do know what it is, it's cool. It's a tool that you can take advantage of and recognize. And if you don't, it still like gives you an accessibility to being able to think creatively, to learn new stuff.
So it's automatically mapping that key.
Yep. So that key is any of these notes that I see on my piano roll, like laid out on the piano. It's like as if I took away all the notes from the piano that didn't fit in A Phrygian. Yeah. So they're all right there. So now I can just click, and I'm gonna just kind of draw a little line, like a little melody like this, right? So as a melody, it's gonna be kind of busy, but it's kind of neat, right?
Sounds exactly like
Phrygian mode, exactly, right? And so, let's draw another melody on another one, and I'll just draw it with a little bit lower.
Is this new down here?
So this has changed a little bit, the way that it looks with velocity and probability, because there's 2 layers to this. So
God, it's beautiful.
So we've got these 2 new melodies going on, right? And I can adjust a little bit to, just kind of get a little bit different tonality out of it. But even focusing on just this first little melody that we made, right? There are 2 ways of adding probability to this. So you get to kind of collaborate with chance elements inside of it, which is really fun. It's not like I'm kind of turning my brain off and then I just let the computer do a bunch of stuff. I'm intentionally adding in uncertainty into the way that this thing loops, right? So let's say the first thing to do is I'll select all the notes, I'll go into the velocity range, and I can set a range of velocities that every time this note sounds, it's going to be somewhere in this range. So velocity is going to be how loud it is.
Right.
That may affect the timbre of the note. It may affect just the volume of it. But I can also just randomize the velocity if I wanted to, which is super easy to do. It takes just a second. I can randomize it just a little bit, and I have that range. But then I also can go down to probability. And with all of the notes, my probability, I can randomize probability so that now every single time this loop happens, it's not going to be the same thing. It's just going to be varying every single time. A more extreme example can happen with drums, right? So let's take our scale off since we're working with drums.
That's exciting to me.
And I'm just going to literally just paint in a bunch of notes on the drums. I'm not even paying attention to it, right? It would probably sound a little bit obnoxious just to go, maybe not, maybe that's cool. I like having that busy one, but
it is cool.
I'm going to take it down here. I'm going to go, we'll just call this thing busy. I'm going to rename that clip. And then this clip right up here, the first one that I've got that will be colored purple, and call this one groove. All right, oops, I need to actually rename it here. We'll call this one groove. And for this one, I'll again just select all the notes and randomize the probability. And now I've got a groove that's going to be a little bit more. Let's also randomize the velocity just a little bit.
All day.
Yeah, and it's
all
just,
day.
And that's the thing is it's now a far more interesting groove, and I'm just kind of painting by numbers, right? You can set it up to create fills with this stuff. So let's do this one and call it fill, and the busy thing can be cool too. So I'll take this and we'll go, yellow is going to be fill, and what I mean by fill is I want it to get busier only at the end of the phrase. So kind of like what a drummer would do, like dun, 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 and then go into the next part, right? It's a hard thing to do with loops because loops just loop. They just do their thing, right? So I can be playing this groove. When I go to a fill, then I have that little fill element in there. I could go to the busy part. Add another fill. 3, 4. And it's just a really again, this is all happening so quickly. It doesn't feel like I'm in there drawing in notes and editing. I'm on the computer. I'm, anything like that.
Do you think there are naysayers that would be like, that's cheating?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure, yes, I know that can be part of it. But I think some of that stems from a misunderstanding of the collaborative element of it, and it is something too, where a lot of times, that would come from, if I had the feeling that somebody was creating music by just kind of pushing a few buttons, but not actually going through the work of being intentional about the way that it sounds. Me, again, going back to Phrygian mode, thinking, okay, I want this to be relatively minor sounding, so I'm picking Phrygian mode. But, if it was just something that was automatic, I'd probably feel differently about it, but it's definitely a collaborative thing. And, the cheating element is kind of it's cheating getting ahead of something in an unfair manner, or is it leveraging, not without getting too philosophical about it. I know we're talking at the beginning of the nerdiness and literary elements behind it, but having probability re-interjected into computer music, it's always been there, and that's always been a big part of computer music because people can kind of live in the concepts of things. But what it does practically, without going into the concepts of things, is that it just creates variation in a way that's not labor intensive. And I would rather be able to use that time and labor to play, a live instrument in, or to play something in through MIDI or mix better, whatever, than going through and drawing all this stuff individually versus adding randomized elements and being like, yeah, I like that. Because you can always go, if I don't like that, I'll unrandomize it, or unprobability what's going on.
This gives a greater credence to the way that I describe Ableton to people, which is it's like a bandmate.
Yeah.
It's like a bandmate that's a genius. That and I refer to that in the looping sense, but this is almost an additive to that. I'm seeing something up in the top right.
Yeah, totally.
I'm seeing BPMs next to these.
Yeah, so this
is that a new feature?
So these are scenes. So scenes inside of Live were always a way of playing clips that are anywhere to the left of this scene right here. This play button will play those clips there to the left, right? We call firing those clips, right? So if I want to play all three of these things, I would go like that, right? To get all three things played. Let's actually put like a bass line right over here. And let's take this probability thing and I'm just going to shoot it down an octave. Whoops, I'm going to take off our...
But to the right of this, of your intro, add drums, add bass, is that a new feature to the right?
Yeah, to the right.
Okay.
Having the BPM and the meter right there in the scene itself is new. You could type this into the scene name, and it would change that stuff as you went. But now we just kind of included that as part of the scene, so it's a little bit easier for folks to find. You don't feel like you're having to kind of type in a code to, get that functionality. But
it's a cool feature, but I like this more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, so. Yeah, it's just easy to go, we want this section of the song to be a little bit faster, and we'll actually have to put something there, so let's put busy beat right there, and we'll take the bass, and I'm going to take the bass and just throw it up an octave, and let's invert it. So now this section, if I go from intro to this next section, I've got a faster BPM, so now it's faster here.
We went totally Nintendo.
Exactly, right? All right, so yeah.
Legit.
Yeah. So maybe one of the last kind of fun things, and this too will be really fun for, if you do any sort of sound design, you do any sort of work, whether that's for film, whether that's for mixing, whether that's for just composition, writing your own songs.
This is great for me because I do a lot of sound design.
Yeah, exactly. Across any genres or styles, anything like that, a couple of the new effects are really, really powerful and interesting to look at. So this first sound already had on it hybrid reverb, and hybrid reverb is a combination of a convolution reverb, which uses special samples called impulse responses to simulate a space, and then a combination of that with an algorithmic reverb or digital sounding reverb, and allows you to route them in series and parallel, use just one or the other, and it really becomes one of the most creative sound tools you could think of, just the reverb itself. So, for example, right now I've got this this is actually a room at Ableton HQ in Berlin, the Ableton Canteen, that's a sample of that space. You can hear this. So that reverb space sounds like, right? And it's running into a new digital reverb algorithm that we've got called Tides, which has this kind of rhythmic rate to it right now. Let's slow it down a little bit. You can hear that kind of come in and out, right?
Yeah.
There's a shimmer reverb in there. Sounds beautiful. Just amazing, amazing sounding reverbs all inside of here. EQ built in right there.
Oh, that's nice.
A vintage mode that allows you to really degrade the signal. Make it sound like a really old digital reverb.
I'm gonna be real good friends with this guy.
And the coolest thing, my favorite thing, personal favorite thing about convolution reverbs is being able to just be like, I'm gonna go up here and grab, I actually know that this phrase, is in a Phrygian actually that we're working with, roughly. I could just grab this piano sample, which again sounds like this. It's like literally the piano progression. I'm gonna drag that in over here. Now it's a reverb. And you can like hear that actual piano part go through as a reverb, which is just really
I
brilliant.
don't
to me,
even
yeah.
understand. Like,
It's really, really neat. So let's say another example of this that could be fun. Let's say, that's kind of a weird little thing. What if we take this little sound right here? So a little weird alien sample sound, right? I'm just going to drag it in there. Now that is a reverb. It's really cool.
dude, I like 60-70% of my sound design is like working with reverb.
Well, and the cool thing is that you could go to a space, like if you have a room, around town that you really love, go in there with a handheld recorder and record yourself going in that space, and then
You've
record
created
that,
yourself
drop it
an
in
IR.
there, and that's not like a very hardcore, impulse response creation thing, but that works for that. And I'll do that with my phone. If I go in a room that sounds really neat, I'll just be like, stick my phone on record a voice memo and clap to excite the room, and then drag it in as a reverb. Hopefully it's in stereo.
I'm just gonna start walking into all my favorite studio rooms and
Exactly,
just collecting impulse responses of their rooms.
And they can be really creative things. I mean, included with 11 are like these really amazing sounding springs. It's like, I'll just turn it off to just the convolution. Okay, these crazy springs. There's like beautiful plates. And then I love these like chambers in large rooms. Gregorian monk's choir room,
Yeah, this is definitely
it's really fun.
one of the things that I've loved about Ableton is the built-in effects, especially the reverb.
Yeah, totally.
Being able to add a little bit of chorus really quick, and like, I kind of have this go-to setting on my reverb, which is just putting the decay up to 11 seconds and pulling the chorus up from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, and just like letting her rip on a return. That's like my thing.
There you go. Well, and so, maybe as a closing little thing for the effects, there's 2 new spectral effects that, in essence, take the sound that you send into them, break it all down into the individual sine waves that make the sounds that come into them, because every sound is made up of a combination of sine waves. It's just everything is very a complex combination of that stuff. That's how we tell, it's like your voice versus my voice, versus a synthesizer versus a drum versus a guitar, blah, blah, blah. And so there's a couple of new effects that take advantage of that, where it'll break the sound down into its partials and then re-synthesizes those. The first one's Spectral Resonator, which I really love for a number of reasons. The biggest thing is that it takes non-tonal stuff like drums, percussive elements, and then turns it into tonal instruments. So here's our drums just soloed up by themselves. All right, and then now we've got this tonal thing that's actually in A. Let's add some stereo imaging to it. Stretch it up like that.
This is a great sound design tool as well.
Exactly. And in addition to being like a really interesting, audio effect, I can control it with MIDI. So that, let's say we take the MIDI from this melodic element right here. So all of these individual notes that are, musical tonal notes are now controlling this instrument. Just like that. I could do the same thing, if I'm working with the drums, like being able to play the MIDI in, through push if I wanted to, a different software instrument. It's just really beautiful sounding effects. So it does get really kind of like goes from cold and digital to really like the strange reverb and interesting sounds. And then alongside of that, there's also a effect called Spectral Time, which takes a freezer on the front end.
Ooh,
So let's say normally you have like a freezer thing, and it's like you freeze it, it stops where it's at, right? But this has a freezer that will automatically freeze, let's say, every 8th note. Create a new freeze, right? Which is pretty cool initially. Now add in a spectral delay where you can actually delay like high frequencies further back in time, low frequencies further forward in time, however you want to do it, and then shift those frequencies around.
Spray.
It's really, really interesting.
Legit spray. I love it. So these are all new to Ableton 11.
Yeah, exactly.
So anybody that's on the fence about getting Ableton, I think it's safe to say you should just do it.
The thing that I love about these effects, and even specifically the stuff that we dealt with, is like, convolution, or I should say hybrid reverb, which is our new reverb. It works for people that are looking for something really realistic, which maybe a lot of folks are working inside of, whether it's sound design or that sort of thing, or with like rock music. You want a cool classic plate for your snare or your vocal or whatever. It works really well for that if you're trying to get stuff that fits inside of like an established genre. But if you're also trying to do something experimental, cool. Import your own crazy IR into it. Now you've got something really unique. Same thing with Spectral Time and with Spectral Resonator. Those are things that can easily get very experimental and push sound to their edges, or it can fit inside of like a a pop song really interestingly. Yeah. But just add enough like left fieldness that it feels like, oh, this is unique. I haven't really heard this texture before. Because as we as musical producers and people working inside of the process from the beginning to the end, we're like, oh, I'm really interested in all the things I did in my process. But a lot of the people that experience what we create are just like, does it make me feel something?
Yeah.
And if you find a way to do that, there's something that's not only exciting to you as a producer, but also exciting for the people that experience it. That's the like sweet spot of all that stuff. So
there's so much to explore. I think that's the other part about Ableton is so fun is I feel like I've just scratched the surface.
Totally. Yeah.
And I've been using it for 7 or 8 months now. Yeah. There's so much to learn. Man, thank you so much for walking us through some of these new features and just sharing your brilliance with us. And I look forward to the next time that we get to do this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, until we meet again, my friend.
Thank you so much, man. Thanks so much.
Happy New Year.
Hey, Happy New Year to you.
Yeah. All right.
Cool.
See you later. Woo. At the time of filming this, Ableton 11 did not have a release date because we filmed it back in January, and by now you could be watching it. It could be 2024, but as of today, Ableton comes out on February 23rd. I am very excited. This was my first look at Ableton 11, and it was really kind of nice to go into a deep dive on just some of the new features with Ableton 11. I would love to know what some of your favorite new features are, and some of you may even have the beta. So if you have the beta and you care to share some of what you've come up with, I would love for you to leave a comment in the comment section. Massive thanks to Dustin for his time. Thanks to Ableton for making such an extraordinary instrument for us to use. Thanks to my buddy Easton Oliver for filming this for me. All of these links to Ableton 11, Dustin, Easton, myself, all of them are available in the notes description below. If you do me a solid and hit like, click subscribe, it really helps the channel, and I've got more coming on the way. Thanks again for being here. We'll see you next time.